HSUS. Danielle is the senior analyst for cat protection and policy at the Humane Society of the United States. She works to clear policy pathways, broaden support, increase the impact of community cat management efforts nationwide as part of the companion animal policy team at HSUS. Danielle has spent her 20-plus year career in animal welfare advocating for the humane treatment of animals, both wild and domestic, promoting the human-animal bond. Originally from Western New York, Danielle holds a BS in animal science from Cornell University and an MS in animals and public policy from Tufts University. Just prior to joining the HSUS in 2015, she managed the community cat program in Washington, D.C. Danielle has TNRed more cats than she can count, and she lives with 5 cats and a catio. You live with a catio. You have a catio in Washington, D.C. Danielle, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. I'm gonna get my screen organized here. Figure out how to get rid of all this extra stuff that's on my screen here.
We're not seeing anything. We just see your screen.
You're not. Are you seeing my PowerPoint?
We see, yeah, we see your PowerPoint. We have your slides up.
Okay, but you don't see me.
We don't need to see your video. We'll see your video at the Q&A.
Excellent, good. Okay, so welcome, thank you. I feel like I'm really changing gears here from that excellent conversation that we just had. That was really fascinating, but hopefully you'll all hold on here when I talk about the DC cat count. Get this working here. So when I talk about cat counting, this is kind of what most people think about. You know, it's what is cat counting? What are we talking about? It just sounds like a crazy thing. And with the 2020 being a census year, I think a lot of people often think about that, but it's not actually a census. We're not trying to count every single kind of cat. It's really more like, I don't know why my advancing pages aren't working. There we go. Wait, one more. There we go. Sorry about that. It's really kind of more like this. It's more like someone looking around these cats and thinking they want to develop a big software project. It's really more about data, estimates of cat populations, science, statistics, technology, processes, and systems. So I'm going to take a step back and think about why. And if for those of you who were at Brian's presentation last night, I think some of this can ring true. When I was working at the DC shelter, working on the community cat program, we were really building our program. We were applying for grants. Thank you for learning about targeting and getting some grants from PetSmart Charities. And the process you do is you figure out like how many cats there are. We use the formula with population of people and plug the numbers in, and you get like this estimate of number of cats. And then you figure out how many surgeries you need to do to get a certain sterilization rate, and then you file your grant application saying we're going to do this many surgeries. You get busy, you trap all these cats, and then at a certain point, you're like, I can't trap any more cats. We've got as many as we can get, but we still haven't reached our grant numbers. So we have to step back and think, well, maybe that estimate of the population was just wrong, because we really don't have a lot of good tools like how to figure out how many cats there are outdoors, and how to judge what resources we need to be able to sterilize the cats in a intensity enough to reduce the population. We don't have a lot of good tools to determine how well our programs are working and to monitor them as we go along. So I was really interested in trying to figure out better ways of keeping track of these cats. And when I moved on to my current position at HSUS, it was really something I was interested in. And I really wasn't the only person who was looking at that. So kind of looking at what are the questions that we're trying to answer, like what is the scope of the problem that we're trying to figure out? Like how many cats are really out there? We often use metrics such as intake of cats into the shelter. How many stray cats are coming in? How many kittens are coming in? What's the euthanasia rate for cats at the shelter? But those are really indirect measures, just as like the number of cats we may be doing TNR on. That's not really a direct measure of how many cats are outside and how many cats out there are sterilized. We have a lot of growing body of evidence that, you know, TNR works for whatever goal, that it is successful in reducing cat populations in a particular community that was studied. But we also know that the way we do TNR, we do community cat programs, can vary a lot from community to community. So how do I know if what I'm doing in my community, in my neighborhood, is actually working? How do I measure that impact of that? So these were these questions that I kept wondering, like, how can we do better? And it's the same thing. I have a lot of conversations with people in the conservation community who are typically, a large portion of them, kind of opposed to outdoor cats. They see the number of cats out there as harmful to wildlife population. They want to have fewer cats outside. We want to have fewer cats outside. So why do we have these conversations that really are unproductive and not going anywhere when we want the same thing? So how can we talk about our success with a common language? So finding that there were actually a whole bunch of other people who were interested in this conversation. And there was another group of folks who were actually coming together, having meetings and trying to figure out how to do some cat counting. At the same time, another group of us was having that conversation. So we ended up all getting together and putting together what we call the DC cat count as this big research project to kind of tackle these questions and figure it out. We did it in DC for a number of reasons, mainly because we could partner with the Humane Rescue Alliance and they could really play an outsized role in getting this work done. For those of you familiar with Washington, D.C., it's a very small area in retrospect to a lot of other communities. There's one shelter. That shelter has the animal control contract and runs the TNR program. So it was one entity that had all the data and all the levers of things that we were looking at. These are some of our partners, or the kind of the governance group and our major funders. We also enlisted the help of the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute for some of their science that they have, that I'll talk a little bit about later, of how they were really instrumental. And then we have like our two real brains, Dr. Tyler Flockhart and Dr. John Boone, who kind of are academics who cross over both the conservation field and the outdoor cat population, humane animal welfare field, and are really the kind of the architects of this whole cat counting concept and idea, and the science behind it all. So we launched this DC cat count project, and it's really more than just counting cats in the District of Columbia. DC is our laboratory. It's kind of our canvas to figuring this out. But what we're really aiming to do is to develop some practical tools that people can use to count cats, to quantify all different types of cats in different settings. And we want to make sure that those are valid, and that there's rigorous scientific research that supports these tools that we're using. So kind of mixing the best known science and technology out there with some additional technology that makes it really accessible to people. And then we want to put all that into a toolkit and show other people how to use it. So although we call it the DC cat count, it's really about cat counting opportunities that can be used globally. And this isn't new. We're really looking at tools that the wildlife conservation field has used to assess populations of wild animals, other animals that you don't necessarily have line up and count off, you know, here I'm here and get a complete census number. looking at different methods that they use to track populations that may be more seen, more unseen, different tools, different ways that they're using it with high levels of science as well as more citizen science. Many people may have heard of the Great Backyard Bird Count, which is an annual event where they enlist people, just, whether you're birders or just everyday people who will like to go outside and observe birds, recording those observations and using them to develop population estimates. So, none of this is really reinventing the wheel. It's just taking all of this information and applying it to outdoor cats, which has not really been done before. So this is kind of the roadmap that we have for our research phase. We're looking at state-of-the-art camera trapping. We really want to get the best possible estimate of the number of cats outdoors. We're also using what are called transect surveys, and I'll explain these in a little bit more detail in some upcoming slides. So use those different kinds of techniques to really validate the different kind of samples. You want to be able to figure out how many cats you see in one method compared to cats that are seen in another method, how detectable cats are, how cats may be more observable, what's the density, the occupancy, a lot of different factors, put them all together and kind of come up with some easy to use tools and protocols. But we're also mixing in analysis of the shelter cat population, looking at how cats are coming in, where they're coming in from, where they're going out to, how long they're there, and some different factors. We also did some household surveys to get some information from residents in DC about their attitudes and ownership rates of cats. And when we have all that together, they'll put it into a statistical model that kind of shows the dynamics of the cat population and the interaction between these different kinds of different aspects of cats. And the idea is that that can help us figure out where there's some different intervention points. When we think of managing outdoor cats, trap-neuter-return often comes to the top, but there are definitely other things that we do that we might not be thinking about as filtering into that, whether it's, spay-neuter access for own cats, different support for people to keep cats in their home. There may be other issues, a lot of the kind of access issues that James just talked about also can fit into some of these things. So we're hoping that this will give a lot of insight into just populations of cats overall. And being able to take that and make it specific to your actual community and not just generalized for a larger population of the US. So it's really the science of counting cats. And we looked for cats, not just where we expected to find cats, but looked all across the district. So this is a map here of DC and some of the sampling blocks we use. So we looked at 55 different sampling blocks that are based on census designated areas. So we know that the population is of that area. We have a lot of demographic information for that area. And we wanted to make sure that we were sampling in an area that was that represented DC as a whole. So some of the factors that we looked at were how the land was used. And these are kind of some of the things that intuitively and anecdotally we know or we believe have a connection to cat populations. High density population areas versus areas that are like park areas, forested area, which if you're not familiar with DC, we actually do have some really vast forested areas that are highlighted here in kind of like the green areas, running in a couple areas of the district. Also looking at income levels, high income from low income, to make sure that we were really getting a good representative sample of cats or areas where there might not be cats throughout our whole study area. Then we have cameras. And I think I had a poll question that goes here.
Ah, polls, how exciting. My favorite
forgot,
word.
I had a poll earlier, but I have a second poll that went right here.
Okay, so let's run some polls. Very exciting. All right, do you want me to do the first one, or you want me to?
Yeah, let's go and do the first two, because I forgot about the next one earlier.
Excellent. All right. So I'm going to launch this poll. So if folks are in full screen, you want to exit out of full screen so that you can see the poll. So how do you currently track how well your community cat program is doing? You track number of, and you can check one or more. So you've got number of stray cats coming into your shelter, number of cats euthanized at the shelter, number of cats TNR'd in the community, and number of community cats living outdoors. So you can vote for as many as you'd like. And the numbers are crunching in.
Voting was supposed to go earlier.
So yes, this is just setting the stage. Resetting the stage. That's all. All right, we are keep voting, folks. All right, I'm going to close the poll, share the results. So currently we track number of stray cats coming into your shelter for 49%, number of cats euthanized at the shelter 28%, number of cats TNR'd in the community 77%, which that's good. Brian was talking about cat stats last night, and there are other ways of tracking that. Number of community cats living outdoors at 31%. So there's that one. And then I'm going to hide the results, and we're going to do the next one. Do you use remote cameras in your TNR efforts? I'll give it a couple more seconds. I'm going to close the poll and share the results. So 27% of you do, and 73% of you don't. So there you go. All right.
I feel like cameras are becoming more and more accessible and used as a tool for cat programs. So it was a really big element of our research project was setting up these camera traps. Essentially, these are the motion activated cameras that are often used for wildlife. They may be called trail cameras, wildlife cameras. And they can be set up and you can record whatever comes by. So we were recording cats, we were recording wildlife, we were recording the vegetation moving over time. So they're a really great tool to be able to capture images of cats 24/7 and the cats that may not come around when people are there, especially strangers, that you may not happen upon. So we had about 80 cameras that we were using constantly. We had people in the community sign up to host cameras in their backyard, in their front yard, in their side yard, wherever they were in DC. We engaged with businesses, government agencies. So we had to get permissions from different agencies like our Parks and Rec department, the schools. So we could put cameras in rec centers and playgrounds. Department of Transportation, which is in charge of like street lights or other things that we might have strapped cameras to. So getting permissions for those. We have some National Park Service properties. We put cameras up at the National Zoo, all throughout the district where our study area was, to capture these images of cats, wildlife. And it was really interesting, really getting people engaged and being part of the project because they could host a camera. We had people who signed up who weren't in one of our study areas, but we often would put cameras in there to get additional data as well. So it was just really fascinating what we found out. So as we just wrapped up the camera trapping in the beginning of this year. So this was kind of the results. So with all of these cameras, over 1,500 camera locations, each camera was set up for about 15 days at each location. Usually there were 2 cameras set together so we could get animals coming from different directions. that was over 6 million photos taken. So that's where you have all of the non-cat images. I know the ones in my yard caught like 30,000 images of the grass moving because it was very windy. But we were able to map out where the cameras are. You can see on this kind of heat map, the darker areas are more concentrated density of where we had cameras, and you can see that there's a pretty good distribution across all of the district. There's a little pullout, even like in the National Mall, which there really aren't a lot of cats there, but as an example where we had cameras set up. So that's a lot of observation. So what does that mean? Here's some just an early result kind of showing the diversity of species that we caught. Cats were not the most common animals that we saw, even though we were setting them specifically for cats. So kind of needing to process all of that camera data, pulling out the images that are relevant, looking at the different animals, as well as recognizing that each camera and each image it takes, it does not represent a single cat. Obviously, you're going to have the same cat in that one camera setting. You're going to have that same cat being shown multiple times over the course of each day, each week in different settings. So then going back and looking at the actual images to determine, is that the same cat? Is that a different cat? Many people, if you have a colony of cats that are all black, you will learn to identify the different black cats, but it can be really hard at first to know the difference between those 3 black cats. And it may be at the distance that you see them, you really can't tell the difference. So really being able to dive into all of this camera data and figure out this kind of the individual cats has been an ongoing project that we're working on. So the other part of that was the transects. And so a transect survey is essentially it's a path. You walk along it and you record the occurrences of cats you see. This is not something that's been brand new for cat counting, for cat population estimates. The photo here is actually an area in Portland, Oregon, where they were doing some cat counting work for the past few years. In one neighborhood, they enlisted a lot of the residents there to work alongside the groups that were running this project, which is the Portland Audubon and the Feral Cat Coalition of Oregon, work together on this. So you have residents, you have cat people, you have bird people, all working together to assess the cat population. In DC, we started out by doing some with volunteers, and then we moved on to doing a more intense transect surveys with the staff for the DC cat count. So we were able to do transects walks in all of the target areas, and some of those we did multiple transects to determine some things like the detectability and some higher validation of the number of cats that we saw. Obviously, if you walk along a path, you're going to see the cats that happen to be there, and we know that that's not true representation of the cats that are there. It's just an estimate of what you see at that point in time. So this is kind of a map of some of the transects that we walked. We made sure that the starting and end points were close to each other. That was for the benefit of volunteers who were going to that area, needing to be able to get back. If you drove over there and parked your car, you were back along at the end of the path, you were by your car again to be able to get home, because not all of them had public transportation there. And so these routes represent a diversity of roads in the area that were representative of that area. So it might be a proportion of larger roads, some smaller roads, residential roads, some alleys that kind of gave you a snapshot of that area. So we took that, and this was really the easy part, is we developed some mobile apps that you could use for this. So instead of writing it all out on paper and kind of using a printout of a Google map and making note of where you saw the cat, we were able to customize some maps that are easily available online, where you can just click and answer some questions on your observation. So if you did you see a cat? We had a question about whether the cat, the relative health of the cat, if you were able to tell if the cat had an ear tip or didn't have an ear tip, age questions, generally broken down to adult or kitten, which we defined as at 6 months. That's a kind of a point where you can tell whether it's a kitten or it's an adult and not really have as much of a gray area. And the idea is that if you do these surveys, transect surveys, repeatedly over time, say in a 6-month intervals, that a kitten would only be a kitten during one of those counts and then would become an adult. So you'd also be able to estimate kind of the age and the new growth of the population. So with the app, it's really nice because it geolocates where you are, so you don't have to figure out on the map exactly which house you were at an exact point. It automatically, when the data uploads to the back end of the system, it automatically puts a point on there. So that makes it really easy to collect that data. And then the validation. So again, you're walking around and you know you're seeing a cat, but you may know that there are a lot more cats in that area because that's anecdotal information, but we don't want to assume that any of this. We want to have the solid science to show that. So we're not looking at cats in a particular time. We're not going somewhere when we know they're all going to be out because it's feeding time. We're trying to standardize this so that anytime you go, we then can figure out how many cats might be there when we compare it to the camera traps that we use. So if we take the data that's taken in the same area at the same time and meld it together, we can come up with some sort of formulas of how detectable cats are when we're doing just the simple transect walks. But then we're also not just talking about the outdoor cats. We included the analysis from the Humane Rescue Alliance shelter data, and this is data that they had over a period of years. Again, it was really helpful to do it in DC because there's only one shelter that we had to look at the data for, and so we know it's uniform rather than trying to pull data together from a number of different shelters that may have kept their data slightly differently. That would have impacted the results. We also did 2,600 representative household surveys. We had a little bit of a challenge in that because we were about to launch our surveys just as the pandemic hit. Initially, we were going to be following up with online surveys with in-person, knocking on doors, trying to have person-to-person conversations with people, but obviously that was not something we were able to do, so we had to adjust a little bit, but we were still able to get responses that were representative of the population of DC, so pretty happy with how that all came out. So then this all goes back to our primary researchers, Dr. Flockhart and Dr. Boone, who probably would explain this in a much more academic way than I will. So we take all of these all the data sets from all these different populations, from our household surveys, the shelter cats, the 2 data sets from the outdoor cats, and integrate it together to come up with some statistical models that we can use in other communities when they plug in their data to figure out how these different kinds of cat populations interact, and help us estimate outdoor cat populations and how they can change over time. And then now that we've wrapped up the research, we're working on putting together our toolkit, which will have all of these different elements. So it's a great resource for any community who wants to replicate what we did in DC in different levels. So if you want to do the whole thing, we have that information there. But if you're focusing on how to estimate your outdoor cat population or monitor your outdoor cat population with the simple transect walks. That's all in here as well. It'll also include how to integrate some of this into ongoing community cat program work. So that's kind of where we're working right now. But the big question for a lot of people then is like, well, how do I then apply this to what we do? So there's like two different focuses. One is just the baseline estimate of the population of cats, which would be the one-time all-out count, get an estimate of how many cats there are in any particular area. So this could be your community as a whole. It could be your county. It could be a neighborhood. It could be a smaller area. It's like however you define your population area that you want to look at. And then again, it's how to figure out how that population is changing over time. So this way you would be replicating, you're repeating the same sampling technique, like say every 6 months, and you could figure out how is your population changing, how are the numbers changing, and how are some of the different demographics. Do you see more kittens, fewer kittens? Are you seeing more cats with ear tips, more cats with collars? Are you seeing an influx of new adult cats? Is your population going down? So looking at the different factors, different things that you're looking at, the different pieces of data that you're observing when you're doing these walks, you can then figure out how you might need to change your program or how your program is succeeding in its goal. So if you're seeing an increasing number of ear-tipped cats in areas that you're doing TNR, that's a good indicator of success. If you're looking at an area and you're still seeing new kittens, obviously that would be an indicator that there are more unaltered cats out there. So kind of looking at all of that in a more data validated way. And with these regular transect counts, that's a really good opportunity to engage citizen science. These aren't assessments that need to be done necessarily by your staff or trained people. These are easy things you can get members of the community, volunteers, caretakers, people who live in those neighborhoods to be able to do. If someone has a smartphone and can utilize one of the apps that's set up for the cat counting, that's great. But it also, you can revert to paper if you have people who don't have that tool and still want to get involved. So we're going to be launching our toolkit, a preview of the toolkit, the results of the research at a talk at Animal Care Expo coming up in April. And then we're also starting what we call our implementation phase. And this is where we are working with a couple different communities hand in hand to apply cat counting, work through some of the kinks that we're sure are going to be there, kind of work through how it can be used more practically, and apply this to those communities and see if what we did in DC and what we've developed works the way that we hoped it should. So we're starting that right now, and the only community that, or the one that's the most farthest advanced in getting this set up, I think right now is probably Maui, thanks to Brian Cordes and some of the work that has been going on there with the shelter and the wildlife community and the county. So nothing else is confirmed yet, but we have a number of conversations going on. So hopefully later this spring we'll have some more information to share on that. So it's pretty exciting. We are on the internet, the Instagram and the Twitter, and I encourage people to follow along there, especially on the Instagram with a lot of the images. We share a lot of the photos, particularly some of the interesting wildlife photos that we get. One of our cameras picked up the first bobcat sighting in DC in many, many years. And I think the last one was actually a cat that had escaped from the zoo, but our camera had actually picked up a bobcat. So it's really interesting to see how comfortable some of these animals are in front of the camera, and some of the things they will do, and kind of the selfies and some really interesting behaviors that we can see. So particularly on Instagram, we can follow along and see some of that as we go along. We have a website, DC Cat Count, that has some more basic information about this, and will be a launch pad when we are ready with sharing the toolkit and other things. And questions can always be directed at info@dccatcount.org. Specifically, we have a project manager that helps keep everyone on task with moving our project forward. Or if you want to reach me, here's my contact information. I just want to thank you all and share how wonderful you all are doing all this great work and taking time here on your Saturday to listen to us talk about cats. So I am happy to try to answer questions.
Perfect. Super. Awesome. So a couple of housekeeping type questions here. The cameras that you use, do you happen to know like the name or the type? And do you have any problems with theft?
I don't remember the actual name. The ones that we use were really expensive. They're not the ones like I would use myself. I think they cost, I want to say like $600 each. Yeah, I can find out the name of them. And we did lock them up to wherever they were attached, and we only had a few that were stolen. And it was interestingly, it was a time that I went out with our field technicians I was following them around for a day, and that was the day that we found that a couple of them had been stolen. They were in a part of DC called Rock Creek Park. So it was a wooded area. Many people, when we started this, were all thinking that, well, yeah, you're going to have problems in like the bad neighborhoods, with this perception that people have that there's, neighborhoods that are higher crime, and that's where you're going to have problems. And that's not where we had the problems. The problem was in a park in a relatively affluent area where I'm sure young people who may have been trying to do some other things and that was hidden away, obviously had taken the cameras, although they left the batteries. I don't understand why, but yeah, it actually wasn't as big of a problem as people thought it might have been.
Do you think that by having the information that you capture with this, it will help with the wildlife? I mean, I know you've been working with Brian and Maui and that kind of thing. I mean, is the hope and the desire that this is going to help resolve some of the wildlife tensions that we may be feeling?
Yeah. Yes, definitely that is. So I'd mentioned that we were working with the Smithsonian, and so we worked with a couple of researchers there who are experts on using the camera trap methods, not for cats, but for other wildlife. So utilizing techniques that are considered they're considered valid and scientifically valid by the conservation community was really important. That it's not that they can discount us, or the science that we use is not rigorous enough, which is often what I hear from the criticism of certain conservationists about some of our TNR studies. They just don't like the way we do science. So we really wanted to make sure that it was inclusive on that. And our two primary researchers come from a conservation background, although they're very pro-cat and humanely managing community cat populations. We we looked at this as not a project to say whether TNR worked or not, but just as a way to collect data and have that measurement. So what you do with that data, what you do with the information, that's separate. So yeah, we're hoping that we have the same language and we can move forward. And some of the conversations we've had with the conservation community has been pretty productive compared to some of the conversations in the past. So
excellent. That's great news. At the end of the day, is there a hope that we will have a better sense of what the number of community cats are nationally based on this project?
yeah, I mean, if you look at the estimates of community cat that we have in the US now, and it's anywhere from what, like, 30 to 100 million. I mean, even the number of owned cats that we have, the data coming from different sources is pretty big. So I think we could take this and kind of extrapolate up, but also as the more communities that utilize this kind of data, and if we can aggregate that together. But to me, like, the number of cats that are in the US it's interesting, but it's not necessarily as useful. Like, we know that cats aren't equally distributed. It goes back to a lot of some of the disparity issues and things that, like, James was talking about. We know that there are clusters of cats in certain areas, and that it's often related to access to care, it's related to income, it's related to the population of people. So we can't, like, take a number and kind of apply it broadly across an area. We want to know that variation. So, like, to me, what's helpful is looking at a particular community and a particular area, like where we're working on a project. Like, if I'm doing TNR here, I want to know how I'm doing TNR is working, like the intensity and the distribution of that. So I think that, to me, that's where it's most practical, and why we want to take this huge science project that we did and create something where you can take your phone and go outside and walk around, and you can figure out how many cats are in your community over time and how well you're doing.
That's excellent. That's great. And so that app that you're talking about is not currently available, but will be available?
So what we've been using, we use Esri. So a lot of the GIS data. So Esri is a company that is pretty, like, in the forefront of GIS. So a lot of people who use, like, GIS for I mean, they use it in all sorts of different industries for mapping and geospatial data. So they have a suite of apps that anyone can use that you can just modify to add your route and add the questions you want. So we've been using that. And there are some other, so we use Collector, and I think they're changing that up. So it's going to be like a field apps is where they're moving to. But there's also other apps like EpiCollect. So any of these can be modified. They're set that a user can enter the data. You can enter the route. You can enter the questions that you want, and then it spills that data into the back end where you need some folks with that statistical know-how to manipulate the data. So there are a number of different options, and that's why we want to try to make it as accessible. That you can use it on an iPhone, you can use it on an Android. You don't have to have a subscription or a account. You don't have to pay for something. You can just, as the citizen scientist, you can just have that information, have that app that you can use to contribute.
Excellent. That's awesome. So we are at about lunchtime. Danielle, I want to thank you so much. And I have a feeling there'd be a long, long list of people who want those cameras when you're done with your project. You'd have a great yard sale, with all those cameras.
Yeah, we're looking at, as we work with other communities to implement this and kind of sharing them there. But yeah, I think there's a big future in using cameras for cat work, and maybe that would be maybe find some good experts who can do a presentation in the future on that.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. That's great. All right. Thank you again, Danielle. Appreciate it. And